The ambitions you chase, that definition of success that gets you out of bed in the morning, what if they aren't actually yours? What if they're just ghosts, lingering ghosts of a colonial project, a race you were forced into centuries ago where someone else designed the finish line for their victory? Now, this isn't just some historical factoid. According to the analysis we're about to dive into, this is the hidden architecture of your reality. And the real question is, can you still find your way out? Think of your mind like an operating system. It has this base code, values, stories, assumptions, that dictates how you see literally everything. But just for a second, entertain this idea. What if that core software was deliberately overwritten? What if a foreign power installed a new program, and its main function wasn't to enlighten you, but to make you obedient? This isn't just a metaphor. It's the core argument we're looking at today, that a 1,000-year-long project of civilizational disconnection is still running in the background of our lives. Right now. You know that feeling, right? You're standing in front of an ancient temple, you see the incredible beauty, but there's a disconnect. It's like you're looking at it through museum glass. You hear the stories from the Puranas, and you appreciate them as mythology, not as a living, breathing source code for a way of life. We often look at our own traditions with the eyes of an outsider. We see the beauty, but we miss the essence. And it leads to this really fundamental question we've got to ask ourselves. Why do we sometimes need our own civilization explained back to us, often by foreign scholars? Okay, now think about the history you learned in school. What was the story? Was it about a vibrant, complex, prosperous civilization? Or was it a story of constant invasions, endless fighting, crippling poverty, and superstition? A dark age that was only saved when foreign rulers showed up with enlightenment. Well, the perspective we're examining here argues that this narrative wasn't an accident. It was a weapon. It was carefully built to cut your connection to any source of pride, to make you believe you came from a broken past, so you'd always be chasing a borrowed future. And that brings us to the most important question of all. We're always told, be modern, innovate, look forward. But what if the blueprint for a truly thriving, sustainable, and meaningful future isn't out there in some Western model we have to copy-paste? What if it's buried deep inside a civilizational memory that's been deliberately hidden from us? A past that wasn't a prison, but a powerhouse of incredible ideas about ecology, economics, community, consciousness. A past that might just hold the keys to the massive problems we're facing right now. Look, this whole discussion isn't just some academic debate. It's really about survival. Because a civilization, it's like a giant banyan tree. It gets its life, its strength from its roots. And when you sever those roots, when you damage its memory, the whole thing becomes unstable. It gets knocked around by every passing ideological storm, every new ism that blows in. That cultural confusion you see everywhere, that search for identity, that feeling of being unmoored, those aren't individual problems. They're the symptoms of a great tree swaying dangerously in the wind because it's forgotten the soil that's supposed to hold it firm.
Okay, let's make this tangible. Take something simple like a banana. To our modern, educated mind, it's a fruit, a commodity, a bunch of calories and potassium with a price tag. But to the pre-colonial Indian mind, it was seen as Vanalakshmi, the wealth-giving goddess of the forest. It was Rampa, that which brings delight to the mind. A single fruit was seen through a lens of reverence, of ecology, of sacredness. That shift from seeing Vanalakshmi to just seeing a banana, that is the entire story of this civilizational amnesia in a nutshell. It's the loss of a sacred way of seeing, replaced by a purely utilitarian one.
And let's be very clear, the argument here is that this wasn't some slow, natural change. It was a strategy. It was deliberate. To truly, permanently conquer a people, you don't just take their land or steal their gold. That stuff can be won back. No. To make sure they stay subjugated, you have to conquer their memory. You have to erase their story and replace it with your own, until they actually believe that your story is the only one that ever really mattered. You make them forget how to see a goddess and a banana. So, what exactly was this lost blueprint? What was the original operating system of Bharatavarsha that was apparently so strong, so sophisticated, that it had to be systematically destroyed? Okay, now we're going to move from the symptoms of the amnesia to the memory itself. Let's start digging. Let's uncover the code of this forgotten world. According to this analysis, the core software, the fundamental program that everything ran on, was a concept called arana prajna. Now, we translate that as gratitude, but it's so much deeper. It's a profound, built-in consciousness of debt. Not money debt, but a sacred debt to nature for giving you food, to your ancestors for giving you life, to your teachers for knowledge, to the community that holds you. This worldview meant life wasn't about transactions to be exploited for profit. It was a web of relationships, all built on reverence and obligation. And that's why a river could be a mother, and a mountain could be a deity. Everything was alive with meaning, because it was all part of this sacred give and take.
Now, what's really fascinating is the hardware that this software ran on. Forget that colonial caricature of a rigid, oppressive caste system. The reality, as it's presented here, was way more dynamic, way more sophisticated. Society was built around these vibrant, powerful artisan and merchant guilds called shrenis. These weren't just jobs, they were basically autonomous corporations. Skill was seen as a sacred inheritance, something you perfected over generations in a family, which led to unbelievable levels of craftsmanship. And here's the kicker. These guilds had their own laws, their own rules, which even powerful kings had to respect. They weren't just economic engines, they were the heart of the community.
And this just shows you how much power they really had. I mean, these were not some oppressed groups waiting to be saved. Not even close. We have inscriptions, historical records that show many of these guilds. Weavers, metalworkers, you name it. They were so wealthy and influential, they were basically the banks of their time. We have tons of accounts of these guilds lending huge amounts of money to kings when the royal treasury was low. This paints a picture of a society that was highly decentralized, where power was spread out and wealth was rooted in communities, not just in the hands of the king. It completely shatters that simplistic top-down story we've all been told. Okay, so if society was so decentralized, how did they transmit the core culture, the ethics, the big stories, to everyone? From the philosopher in his study to the farmer in the field. Well, it was through these ingenious systems like the Mankaskars. These were the picture showmen. There were traveling bards and storytellers who went from village to village with these long, painted scrolls that showed scenes from the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and the Puranas. And as they unrolled the scroll, they'd sing and narrate the stories. You can think of it as a pre-modern, mobile, cinematic universe, a nationwide, open-air school that didn't need any buildings or state funding. So here's the crucial point. Through things like the Mankas, the deepest, most profound philosophical ideas of the entire civilization were made accessible and emotionally powerful for every single person, whether they could read or not. This wasn't about memorizing facts. It was about cultural absorption. It created this powerful, shared civilizational consciousness, a common moral language that tied millions of diverse people together across a huge landmass. This was the real universal education system. It was alive, it was entertaining, and man, was it effective. So think about it. A civilization with a core software of gratitude, with a decentralized hardware of powerful guilds, and a mass communication system that makes sure everyone shares the same cultural DNA, that is a civilization that is confident, self-sufficient, and really, really hard to control. And for that exact reason, according to the analysis we're looking at, it had to be dismantled. But this wasn't a battle fought with swords and cannons alone. This was a war for the mind. The main point of attack for this invasion was the education system itself. See, the traditional Sanatana idea of education was that it was a sacred duty, a way to pass on wisdom and create ethical, cultured people rooted in Dharma. The British colonial system, though, it had a totally different goal. Its purpose was to build a factory designed to churn out a class of people who, in the famous words of Thomas Macaulay, would be Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. The goal wasn't to empower the Indian mind, it was to create clerks to help run the empire. And let's be absolutely clear about what they said they were doing. The guys who designed this system, they were explicit about it. The goal was nothing less than to denationalize and de-Indianize the people, to cut them off from their roots so completely that they would start to look at their own culture with contempt and see the culture of their conquerors as the best thing in the world. You know that feeling of being a tourist in your own land we talked about? Well, this perspective argues it wasn't some accident. It was the intended result of a weaponized education system aimed right at the soul of the civilization. And this is where we get to the most devastating claim in this whole analysis. You'd think that this process of mental colonization would have been thrown in reverse the second India got political independence in 1947. But it wasn't. The new ruling elite, who were themselves the prize-winning products of this very education system, they just took over the machinery. They inherited the same institutions, the same bureaucracy, the same laws, and most importantly, the same intellectual framework that saw their own traditions as backward, as an obstacle to progress. The colonial project was just given an Indian face and pepped right on running, sometimes with even more enthusiasm.
So this is the fundamental reframe we are being asked to make. For generations, the story has been that your past was a prison, a dark cell of caste, superstition, and stagnation that you needed to be liberated from by outsiders. But what if that was the most effective lie ever told? What if that past, the one they worked so hard to erase and slander, what if it was actually a fortress? A fortress of cultural confidence built on a software of gratitude. A fortress of economic strength built with the hardware of autonomous guilds. A fortress of intellectual unity built by storytellers like the Monkas. A fortress that had to be torn down from the inside before the city could ever be truly conquered. So, if you can even entertain the idea that your mind has been colonized, that a great amnesia has been forced on you, then the next question is unavoidable. How do you recover? How do you get your own story back? This isn't about blaming people. This is presented as a personal and a collective journey, a journey of psychological and spiritual decolonization. The path forward, as it's laid out here, has three big interconnected steps. First, you have to actively and deliberately recover your civilizational memory. That means reading the histories they never taught you, engaging with the philosophies they told you were just myths. Second, and this might be the hardest part, is to consciously stop needing Western validation, to stop looking to foreign universities or media to tell you what's valuable about your own culture. And third, to find your own living roots, personally and deeply, inside the vast, diverse, and profound framework of Sanatana Dharma. The historian Sitaram Goyal, he just captured the modern challenge perfectly. He said that in an age of constant ideological attack, just being born into a culture isn't enough to keep it alive anymore. You have to become a convinced and conscious participant. What that means is identity can't be a passive thing you inherit. It has to be a conscious choice. It takes effort, it takes study, and it takes the guts to think for yourself against whatever the popular opinion is. And this is what it all leads to. The ultimate mental revolution. For generations, we've been trapped by a false equation that to be modern means to become Western, to adopt their clothes, their language, their worldview. But true modernity is not imitation. True modernity is being so deeply and confidently rooted in your own identity that you can deal with the entire world on your own terms. It means being unapologetically and authentically yourself, drawing strength from your ancient roots while you reach for the sky. This entire exploration, this whole map of a forgotten past and a possible future, it's drawn from the deep and careful work that Sandeep Balakrishnan presented in his book, Reclaiming Bharat. It really stands as a powerful tool for anyone who wants to take that first step on the journey, the recovery of our own civilizational memory. So this is where we end. We've journeyed through a story of 1,000 years of noise. The noise of invasions, of colonial propaganda, of intellectual self-doubt. It's a loud, confusing noise designed to drown out the quiet, steady signal of an entire civilization. And so the final question, the one this whole journey leaves you with, it's not a historical one. It's a deeply personal one. After all that noise, what does it truly mean to find your way back and to finally be home?